A kind-hearted librarian, Jenkins, is falsely accused of a brutal crime after stopping to help a crying child on a stormy night. As his life unravels, a missing boy holds the key to the truth, but fear keeps him silent. With mounting evidence against him and time running out, Liam must uncover the hidden dangers lurking in the shadows of the city. Will the boy find the courage to speak out before it's too late? And how far would you go to prove your innocence when the world turns its back on you? Rain battered the city streets, each drop ricocheting off the slick pavement and running into rivulets that swirled like secrets heading toward the sewers. Jenkins pulled his coat tighter around him, his boots splashing through puddles as he hurried home from the library. The storm had picked up unexpectedly, turning an already dreary evening into a chaotic mess of flashing headlights and honking horns. He noticed the child immediately. The boy stood at the mouth of an alley, his thin frame shivering under the weight of the rain. Barefoot, with a tattered hoodie hanging from his slight shoulders, the child's face was partially obscured, but his sobs were unmistakable. Something about the scene clawed at Liam's chest, as if the storm had birthed this fragile figure just to test his compassion. "Hey, are you all right?" Liam called, his voice gentle as he approached. He crouched a few feet away, trying not to startle the boy. "What are you doing out here? Where are your parents?" The boy's face lifted for a moment, wide eyes, dark with fear and glistening with tears, before he shook his head and pointed deeper into the alley. Liam followed the gesture and noticed the glint of something metallic lying in the shadows. His stomach tightened as he stepped closer. At that exact moment, chaos descended. Shouts erupted from behind him, harsh and commanding. "Freeze! Don't move!" Red and blue lights splashed against the brick walls, turning the rain into shards of color. Liam froze, his hands instinctively rising as uniformed officers surged toward him. One officer tackled him to the wet ground, pinning his arms as another cuffed his wrists. "What's going on?" Liam shouted over the pounding rain, his voice cracking with disbelief. "I didn't do anything!" The officers ignored his protests. "We've got him," one muttered into a radio. Another leaned over him, their voice cold and clipped. "You're under arrest for robbery and assault. The victim's just up ahead, and guess what? Your footprints are leading straight to him." "What victim?" Liam stammered, rainwater mixing with the dirt smearing his face. There's a kid." He turned to point at the boy, but the child was gone, swallowed by the shadows as if he had never been there. The station was cold, fluorescent lights flickering faintly above Liam as he sat in the cramped interrogation room. His wet clothes clung to him, the chill from the rain seeping deep into his bones. Across the table sat Detective Harper, a stocky man with a sharp jaw and eyes that seemed to pierce through lies. "You're saying you just happened to stumble into the alley where an elderly man was robbed and beaten unconscious?" Harper's tone was skeptical, his fingers drumming against the table. "And you were, what? Offering a helping hand?" "Yes." Liam's voice rose in frustration. "I swear there was a child. He was crying and I stopped to help. That's all." Harper leaned back, unimpressed. "Funny thing is, the wallet was found tossed a few feet away from where you were kneeling. And those footprints, they match your boots." Liam's jaw tightened. "I don't know how any of that got there. You have to believe me." Harper smirked, pushing a manila folder across the table. "Belief isn't what matters here, Jenkins. Evidence is." He opened the folder to reveal grainy photos, muddy prints leading into the alley, a discarded wallet, and an elderly man sprawled on the ground. Liam's stomach churned as he stared at the images. "Why would I do something like this?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm a librarian. I have no reason." "You tell us," Harper interrupted, his voice low. "You're looking at serious charges. Assault, theft, maybe even attempted manslaughter if the old man doesn't make it." Liam felt his world crumbling. His colleagues would hear about this. His family would hear about this. And that boy, the one who could clear his name, was gone, a ghost in the storm. By the time Liam was released on bail, thanks to a desperate call to his older sister Alina, the city had moved on from the storm, but not from its suspicions. News outlets picked up the story of the Good Samaritan gone rogue, painting him as a wolf in sheep's clothing. The whispers began at the library almost immediately. Colleagues he'd once laughed with over coffee now avoided his gaze. Parents lingered longer in the children's section, their eyes sharp with mistrust. "I don't understand," Alina said one evening as she set a steaming bowl of soup in front of him. Her small apartment had become his refuge while he awaited trial. "Why were you even in that alley? You're not telling me everything." Liam looked at her, his face etched with weariness. "I told you everything I know, Alina. I saw a kid, he needed help." She frowned but said nothing more, her silence heavy with unspoken doubts. As days turned into weeks, Liam found himself unraveling. The legal fees mounted, forcing him to dip into his savings. The library suspended him indefinitely, pending the trial. Everywhere he went, he felt the weight of unseen eyes judging him, condemning him. But worse than all of that was the nagging guilt that he couldn't save the child. If the boy had stayed, if he'd spoken up, none of this would be happening. Somewhere out there, Liam thought, the child was alone, scared, and possibly in danger. He stared out the window as rain began to fall again, his breath fogging the glass. He would fight this, he decided. He had to, for himself, for the truth, and for the boy who had vanished like a whisper in the storm. The city carried on as it always did, indifferent to the weight of one man's burden. Liam spent his days poring over legal documents, meeting with his overworked public defender, and trying to piece together how he could prove his innocence. Every time he closed his eyes, the boy's face haunted him, his tear-streaked cheeks, the unspoken fear in his eyes. But the boy wasn't just a phantom of memory. Someone out there had to know him. Someone had to care. Liam spent the little free time he had walking the streets near the alley, hoping against reason that he might catch a glimpse of the child. The area was grim, dotted with abandoned storefronts and graffiti-splashed wall, a place where shadows loomed even in daylight. He approached corner store owners and buskers, anyone who might have seen something that night. But the answers were always the same. A shake of the head, a mumbled sorry, or an averted gaze. One afternoon, as Liam trudged past a row of dingy apartments, he spotted a woman in her 50s sitting on the stoop. She was swaddled in a blanket despite the warm sun, a cigarette dangling from her fingers. Her eyes, sharp and mistrusting, followed him as he approached. "Excuse me," Liam began hesitantly, pulling the hood of his sweatshirt tighter around his face. The news stories had made him infamous in the neighborhood. "I'm looking for a kid, a boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, thin, dark hair, wearing a hoodie. He might have been around here a few weeks ago." The woman's lips curled into a wry smile. "That's half the kids in this dump, sweetheart. You're gonna have to be more specific." Liam swallowed his frustration. He was in the alley the night of the storm, crying. I think he might have been scared of someone. At this, the woman's expression darkened. She stubbed out her cigarette and looked away. "You should stay out of things you don't understand, especially around here." "What do you mean?" Liam pressed, desperation creeping into his voice. "Do you know something? Please, this is important." The woman's gaze flickered toward him, then back down the street. She leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you're smart, you'll let it go. There's folks around here who don't like people asking questions. And if that boy's who I think he is, well, he's better off gone." Liam's heart sank. Before he could respond, the woman stood and shuffled back into the building, the door slamming behind her. The next day, Liam's lawyer, Rachel, called him to her office for a grim meeting. Rachel was young, with a fierce determination that belied her years. But even she seemed worn down by the case. She slid a folder across the desk to Liam, her expression unreadable. "Prosecution's added another piece of evidence," she said, her tone clipped. "They've got a witness." Liam's stomach clenched. "Who?" Rachel hesitated, tapping her pen against the desk. "An anonymous tipster. Says they saw you running from the alley that night." "That's a lie!" Liam's voice rose, echoing off the walls. "I didn't run. I was helping that boy." Rachel held up a hand to calm him. "I believe you, Liam, but anonymous tips are tricky. The jury won't know who the witness is or why they're hiding their identity. All they'll see is someone claiming you were fleeing the scene." Liam slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. "It's like they're building a story around me, a story I don't belong in." Rachel sighed. "That's the system, Liam. Sometimes it's not about what's true, it's about what sticks. But we'll fight this. I've requested footage from nearby street cameras. If we're lucky, maybe we'll find something they missed. Liam nodded numbly, clinging to the faint hope that the truth would somehow emerge. As the days dragged on, Liam's isolation deepened. Even Alina, his fiercest supporter, began to tread carefully around him, her questions laced with doubt. One evening, as they ate dinner in silence, she finally spoke. "Liam," she said softly, setting down her fork, "you've always been honest, even when it's hard. But is there something you're not telling me? About why you were in that alley?" He stared at her, the weight of her words pressing on his chest. "I've told you everything, Alina, I swear." She studied him for a long moment before nodding, though her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. "Okay," she said quietly, "but you have to be prepared. People aren't going to wait for the truth. They'll believe whatever's easiest." One night, unable to sleep, Liam found himself back in the alley. The storm had long since passed, but the memory of it lingered in the air. He crouched near the spot where he'd seen the boy, his fingers brushing against the cold pavement. A broken bottle glinted nearby, and he imagined the chaos of that night, the confusion, the fear, the overwhelming sense of helplessness. As he stood to leave, he noticed something wedged between the cracks of the bricks, a small piece of fabric, dark and frayed. His heart raced as he pulled it free. It was part of a hoodie, the same color as the one the boy had worn. It wasn't much, but it was proof that the boy had been there. Liam tucked the fabric into his pocket, a spark of determination reigniting within him. He didn't know how or when, but he would find the boy, and when he did, the truth would come to light. Liam clutched the frayed piece of fabric in his pocket as if it were a lifeline. It was small, insignificant to anyone else, but to him, it was a tether to the truth. His nights grew restless, his days consumed by the search for a boy who seemed to exist only in the shadows. At work, whispers followed him like phantoms. Though suspended, Liam still passed the library occasionally, a habit ingrained from years of routine. The once warm place where he'd felt most at home now seemed hostile. His colleagues avoided him when they saw him on the street. One former friend muttered just loud enough for Liam to hear, "Looks like the quiet ones really are the ones to watch." It wasn't just strangers who questioned him anymore. Even Alina's reassurances grew hesitant. The unspoken question lingered between them. If you're innocent, why can't you prove it? One afternoon, after another fruitless day searching the neighborhood, Liam found himself at the bus stop near the alley. He scanned the faces of those walking by, hoping one might trigger recognition. Then, from across the street, he saw her, the woman from the stoop. "Hey!" he called, darting through traffic to reach her. She flinched at his approach but didn't run. Up close, Liam could see her weathered face was lined with worry. "Didn't I tell you to stay out of this?" she hissed, glancing nervously up and down the street. "I can't," Liam replied firmly. "Not when it could clear my name. You said you knew something about the boy. Please, I just need to find him." The woman hesitated, chewing her lip. Finally, she sighed. "You really don't know what you're stepping into, do you? Help me understand," Liam pleaded. "Who is he?" The woman leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "His name's Micah. He's been running with a bad crowd. Gangs, mostly. They use kids like him for their dirty work. Pickpocketing, lookouts, things like that. If he was in that alley that night, well, chances are he was caught up in something bigger than you realize." Liam's breath caught. "Do you know where he is now?" She shook her head. "No one ever knows where those kids are for long. They move them around, keep them scared. But if you're looking for answers..." Her eyes darted to the corner, where a group of men loitered near a graffiti-covered wall. "Talk to them. Just don't say I sent you." Liam's pulse quickened as he turned toward the men. They were rough-looking, their postures casual but tense. Approaching them felt like stepping onto a thin sheet of ice. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady despite the fear knotting his stomach. "I'm looking for someone." "A boy named Micah." One of the men, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped forward. He wore a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "And who's asking?" Liam hesitated. I just need to find him. He might have seen something the night of the storm." The smirk faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "You're that guy from the news, aren't you? The one they say beat up some old man." "I didn't do it," Liam said firmly. "I'm just trying to clear my name." The man let out a short, humorless laugh. "You're barking up the wrong tree, library boy. Go home before you get hurt." But Liam didn't move. "Please, if you know anything about Micah..." The man's hand shot out, grabbing Liam by the front of his coat. "I said, go home." His voice was low, menacing. "You don't want to mess with the people Micah works for." He shoved Liam backward, sending him stumbling into the street. A car honked as it swerved to avoid him, and by the time Liam regained his footing, the men had disappeared down an alley. The encounter shook him, but it also deepened his resolve. He now had a name, Micah, and a clearer picture of the danger the boy was in. But it also raised more questions. If Micah was involved with gangs, could he have been part of the robbery? Was Liam protecting someone who might have set him up? The thought gnawed at him, but he refused to give in to suspicion. He couldn't believe that the fear in Micah's eyes had been an act. That evening, Liam shared what he'd learned with Rachel. Her reaction was cautious, but intrigued. "A gang connection complicates things," she said, scribbling notes. "If Micah was coerced into staying silent, that could explain why no one's come forward. But proving it? That's going to be tricky." "I found this," Liam said, pulling the frayed piece of fabric from his pocket. "It's from Micah's hoodie. Could it help?" Rachel examined it carefully. "It's a start," she said. "If we can connect it to Micah, it might back up your story. I'll look into missing persons reports and see if we can trace him. But Liam," she hesitated, "this could take time. And right now, time isn't on our side." Days turned into weeks, and Liam's hope began to waver. He started volunteering at a local soup kitchen in the evenings, partly to distract himself and partly to feel like he was still capable of doing good. It was there that he met Clara, a social worker with a kind smile and a knack for listening. "You seem like you've got a lot on your mind," she said one evening as they washed dishes together. Liam hesitated, unsure if he should burden her with his story, but something about her warm, steady gaze made him open up. He told her everything, about the boy, the alley, the accusations hanging over him like a storm cloud. Clara listened intently, her brow furrowing. When he finished, she said, "Micah sounds like one of my cases. If it's the same boy, he's been in and out of foster homes for years. A lot of these kids get pulled into dangerous situations because they don't have anyone looking out for them. Do you think you could find him?" Liam asked, his voice tinged with desperation. Clara nodded slowly. "I can try. But if he's scared, it'll take time to earn his trust, and you'll need to be patient." "I'll do whatever it takes," Liam said. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. Liam clung to Clara's promise like a lifeline. For weeks, she followed every lead, contacting foster agencies and outreach programs. But Micah remained elusive. Meanwhile, Liam's trial date loomed closer, and the pressure weighed heavily on him. Every passing day felt like sand slipping through an hourglass. One gray morning, Clara called with news. "I think I've found him," she said. "A boy matching Micah's description was placed in a temporary shelter 2 weeks ago. But Liam..." She paused, her voice cautious. "He's scared. He doesn't trust anyone." Liam exhaled, relief and anxiety battling for dominance. "Can I see him?" "I don't think that's a good idea," Clara said. "Not yet. If he recognizes you from that night, it could overwhelm him. Let me talk to him first, see if he's willing to open up." The wait was excruciating. Days stretched into an eternity as Liam replayed the events of that stormy night in his mind. He began to doubt himself, wondering if he had somehow misread the situation. What if Micah had been involved in the robbery? What if he wasn't the innocent victim Liam believed him to be? But those doubts dissolved when Clara finally called back. "He's willing to talk," she said. "But there's a catch. He won't speak to the police, and he won't go on record. He's terrified of what the people who threatened him might do." Liam's heart sank. Without Micah's testimony, clearing his name would still be an uphill battle. But it was a start. "Can I meet him?" Liam asked. Clara hesitated. "I think it's best if I meet with him alone first. I'll let you know how it goes." Clara found Micah sitting alone in a corner of the shelter's recreation room. His hoodie, too large for his small frame, swallowed him, making him look even younger than his age. He flinched when she sat down, his wary eyes darting around the room. "Hi, Micah," Clara said gently. "My name's Clara. I work with kids like you. Kids who've had a tough time but are trying to figure things out." Micah said nothing, his fingers nervously picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. "I want you to know you're safe here," Clara continued. "No one's going to hurt you." Still, Micah remained silent. Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a small pack of cookies, setting them on the table between them. "These are my favorite," she said with a small smile. "They always make me feel better when I'm having a rough day." Micah's eyes flicked toward the cookies, then back to her face. Slowly, he reached for the pack, his movements cautious, like a cornered animal testing its surroundings. Clara waited until he'd taken a bite before speaking again. "I heard about what happened the night of the storm. That must have been really scary for you." Micah froze, the cookie halfway to his mouth. His eyes filled with panic, and he started to get up, but Clara placed a gentle hand on his arm. "It's okay," she said softly. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to share. I just want to help." Micah hesitated, then sank back into his chair. For a long moment, he stared at the table, his small shoulders trembling. "They said they'd hurt me if I told," he whispered finally, his voice barely audible. Clara's heart ached at the fear in his voice. "Who said that?" "The gang," Micah said, tears welling in his eyes. "They made me watch the alley. They said if I warned anyone, they'd come after me. And my sister." Clara's breath caught. "Micah, I need you to be brave. If we can tell someone what really happened, we can protect you and your sister. But we need your help." Micah shook his head violently. "I can't. They'll know it was me." Clara nodded, understanding his fear. "Okay," she said gently. "You don't have to do anything right now, but if you ever feel ready, you can tell me, and I'll make sure you and your sister are safe." Micah looked up at her, his eyes full of a fragile hope. "You promise?" "I promise," Clara said, her voice firm. "No one will hurt you again." When Clara relayed the conversation to Liam, his chest tightened with a mix of relief and frustration. "He's just a kid," Clara said. "He's been through so much. We can't push him." "I know," Liam said, running a hand through his hair. "But if he doesn't speak up, how am I supposed to prove I didn't do it?" "There might be another way," Clara said. "Micah mentioned the gang. If we can figure out who they are, we might be able to link them to the crime instead of you." "How do we do that?" Liam asked. "Carefully," Clara said. "I have some contacts who might be able to dig into it. But Liam, this could get dangerous. Are you sure you want to keep going?" Liam's eyes hardened. "I don't have a choice." The investigation took a darker turn as Clara and her contacts began uncovering details about the gang. They were a small but ruthless group, known for recruiting children like Micah to do their dirty work. The alley where the crime had occurred was a known spot for their operations, a place where victims were ambushed and left with no witnesses. Clara managed to pull records from a nearby shelter where Micah had stayed before. Among his belongings was a slip of paper with a name scrawled on it. Eli. Liam's stomach churned when Clara showed him the name. "Who's Eli?" he asked. "One of the gang members," Clara said. "Micah probably trusted him at some point. But from what I've heard, Eli's one of the worst. If he was there that night, he could be the one who hurt the man in the alley." The pieces were starting to come together, but there was still no hard evidence tying Eli or the gang to the crime. Liam felt like he was walking a tightrope, the ground beneath him crumbling with every step. And then, one night, Clara called him in a rush of urgency. "Liam," she said breathlessly, "Micah wants to talk to you." The tension in Liam's chest was suffocating as he approached the shelter that night. The air was heavy with the promise of rain, a cruel echo of the storm that had set this nightmare in motion. Clara met him at the entrance, her face a careful mask of encouragement and caution. "Micah's in the rec room," she said softly. "He's nervous, but he wants to see you. Just go slow, Liam. He's carrying a lot." Liam nodded, swallowing his anxiety. As he stepped inside, his eyes immediately found the small boy sitting at the corner of a worn couch, his knees drawn to his chest. Micah looked even younger than Liam remembered, his wide eyes darting nervously around the room. "Hi, Micah," Liam said gently, sitting in a chair a few feet away. "I'm Liam. Do you remember me?" Micah nodded, his movements quick and skittish. "You were there," In the alley, he whispered. That's right, Liam said. I was there because I saw you, Micah. I wanted to make sure you were okay. The boy's eyes filled with tears, and he looked away. You shouldn't have. They saw you. Who saw me? Liam pressed, keeping his voice calm and steady. Them, Micah said, his voice trembling. Eli and the others. They said if anyone found out, they'd come for me and my sister. Liam leaned forward, his heart breaking for the child in front of him. Micah, I know you're scared, but you didn't do anything wrong. I'm the one who's in trouble now because no one knows what really happened. I need your help to tell the truth. Micah sniffled, wiping his nose on his sleeve. I didn't mean for them to hurt the man. Eli told me to watch the alley, that it was just to scare people. But when the man fought back, Eli... He trailed off, his voice cracking. He took the wallet and ran. Liam's pulse quickened. Micah, if you tell this to someone who can help, we can stop them from hurting anyone else. You and your sister can be safe. Micah shook his head violently, his small hands gripping the edge of the couch. You don't understand. They'll know it was me. They always know. Micah, Clara interjected gently, stepping into the conversation. What if we could prove what happened without you having to say anything? What if we could find a way to show the truth without anyone knowing it came from you? Micah hesitated, his gaze darting between Clara and Liam. How? Clara knelt beside him, her voice soothing. Do you remember anything from that night that might help us? Did Eli say anything? Or was there something they left behind? Micah bit his lip, his brow furrowed in concentration. Eli dropped something when he ran, he said finally. I think it was his keychain. It had a skull on it. Liam and Clara exchanged a glance, hope flickering between them. Micah, that's really helpful, Clara said with a reassuring smile. Do you remember where he dropped it? Micah nodded. By the dumpster, in the back. The following day, Clara and Liam returned to the alley, their steps cautious as they searched near the dumpster. The area reeked of decay, and the faint hum of distant traffic provided an eerie backdrop. Do you think it's still here? Liam asked, his voice low. If it's small, it might have been overlooked, Clara said, scanning the ground. After several tense minutes, Liam's gaze caught on something glinting beneath a pile of trash. He crouched, his fingers brushing aside debris until he uncovered a small metal keychain shaped like a skull. His heart pounded as he held it up. This has to be it, he said, his voice trembling with a mix of relief and determination. Clara examined it closely. If we can tie this to Eli, it could corroborate Micah's story. Let's get this to someone who can help. Rachel's reaction to the keychain was cautious optimism. It's not definitive proof, she said, turning it over in her hands. But it's something. If we can connect it to Eli, it strengthens your case. How do we do that? Liam asked. Rachel leaned back in her chair, thinking. If Eli's in the system, his records might include details about personal items like this. I'll request access through the proper channels, but it could take time. Liam clenched his fists, frustration bubbling under the surface. We don't have time, Rachel. My trial's in 2 weeks. Rachel met his gaze, her expression firm. I'll push as hard as I can, but we have to be careful. If the prosecution finds out what we're doing, they'll use it against us. As the days crept by, Liam's anxiety reached a boiling point. The media frenzy surrounding his case had only grown, painting him as a cunning predator who hid behind a gentle demeanor. Even Alina, his steadfast supporter, seemed worn down by the constant scrutiny. One evening, as Liam sat alone in Alina's apartment, his phone buzzed. It was Clara. Liam, she said, her voice urgent. I just heard from Rachel. They matched the keychain to Eli. He has a record, petty theft, assault, gang affiliation. It's him. Liam's breath caught. Does this mean? It means we have leverage, Clara said. But we need more. Micah's testimony could seal this. Liam's heart sank. He won't talk. He's too scared. Maybe not to the police, Clara said, her tone thoughtful. But what if he spoke to a judge in private? He wouldn't have to face Eli or anyone else. It was a fragile plan, but it was all they had. That night, Liam met Micah at the shelter again. The boy was quieter than before, his fear palpable. But when Liam explained the plan, to speak privately to someone who could protect him and his sister, Micah's small frame seemed to steady. I'll try, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Liam placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You're braver than you know, Micah. We're going to get through this." But even as he spoke the words, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was far from over. The tension was unbearable as Liam and Clara waited outside the judge's private chambers. Rachel had pulled every string she could to secure this meeting, a rare exception that allowed Micah to speak without the presence of the police or the prosecution. Micah sat on the bench beside Clara, clutching her hand tightly. His small fingers trembled, and his wide eyes darted nervously toward the heavy door ahead. "You're going to do great," Clara whispered, brushing a reassuring hand over his hair. "Just tell the truth. That's all anyone wants to hear." Liam crouched down to Micah's level, his voice steady despite his own nerves. "You're not alone in this. We're all here for you." Micah nodded, though his lips trembled. "What if they don't believe me?" "They will," Clara said firmly. "The truth always comes through." Before Micah could reply, the door creaked open. A clerk stepped out, nodding toward the small group. "He's ready." Micah hesitated, his small frame rigid with fear. Clara squeezed his hand. "I'll be right here when you come out." The boy nodded again, then slowly walked inside. The door shut behind him with an ominous thud. The minutes stretched into an eternity as they waited. Liam paced the hallway, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if Micah froze? What if his testimony wasn't enough? What if Eli or the gang somehow found out? Clara sat calmly, her hands folded in her lap, though the tightness in her jaw betrayed her own nerves. "This is his choice," she said softly, as much to herself as to Liam. "We can only hope he feels safe enough to share what he knows." When the door finally opened, Micah stepped out with a shaky but determined expression. Clara immediately wrapped him in a hug, whispering words of praise and comfort. Liam's heart swelled with relief and gratitude. "What happened?" he asked gently. Micah looked up at him, his eyes still brimming with fear but glinting with newfound courage. "I told him everything." Liam knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You were so brave, Micah. Thank you." The clerk reappeared, clearing her throat. "The judge will review Micah's testimony alongside the evidence. If everything checks out, it could significantly impact your case, Mr. Jenkins." Liam nodded, his chest tight with cautious hope. "Thank you." The next few days were a whirlwind. Rachel received word that the judge had deemed Micah's testimony credible, and his account, combined with the evidence of the keychain, was enough to prompt further investigation. The police were forced to redirect their focus toward Eli and his associates. But the gang didn't take the scrutiny lightly. One evening, as Liam was walking home from the soup kitchen, he felt the weight of someone following him. He quickened his pace, his heart pounding, but the footsteps behind him mirrored his every move. Turning a corner, he found himself face to face with two men, their silhouettes ominous under the flickering streetlight. "Library boy," one of them sneered, stepping closer. "You should have kept your nose out of our business." "I don't want any trouble," Liam said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. "I just want the truth," the man laughed coldly. "Truth's a funny thing. Sometimes it gets people hurt." Before Liam could react, the second man lunged, shoving him against the wall. Pain exploded in his side as the first man landed a punch, then another. Liam tried to shield himself, his mind flashing to Micah's terrified face. He couldn't let them win. Not now, not after everything. Suddenly, a shout rang out. "Hey! Leave him alone!" The men froze, turning toward the voice. A woman holding a phone stood at the end of the alley, its screen glowing as she recorded the scene. "I've got everything on camera! The cops are on their way!" The men cursed under their breath and bolted, their footsteps fading into the night. The woman rushed to Liam's side, her face filled with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked, helping him to his feet. Liam nodded, wincing as he touched his bruised ribs. "I'll be fine. Thank you." "You're that guy from the news, aren't you?" she said. "The one with the trial?" "Yes," Liam admitted, his voice heavy with exhaustion. She gave him a sympathetic look. "I hope they clear your name. You don't seem like the kind of person who'd do something like that." Liam managed a weak smile. "Thank you." The assault only strengthened Liam's resolve. With Clara's help, Micah agreed to testify in court, his identity protected under a special arrangement. Rachel built a compelling case, weaving together Micah's testimony, the keychain, and new evidence tying Eli to other crimes in the area. As the trial began, Liam sat in the defendant's chair, his nerves frayed but his hope unwavering. Micah's voice, though shaky, was steady as he recounted the events of that fateful night. He described how Eli had forced him to act as a lookout, how he'd seen the older man fight back, and how Eli had attacked him before fleeing. The courtroom fell silent as Micah finished, his small figure dwarfed by the witness stand. Clara sat nearby, her presence a steadying force for the boy. Rachel stood, her voice firm as she addressed the jury. "Micah's courage has brought us closer to the truth," she said, "but it's up to you to see it through." The prosecution's case faltered under the weight of Micah's testimony and the mounting evidence against Eli. The jury deliberated for hours, and when they finally returned, the tension was palpable. The foreperson stood, her expression solemn. "We find the defendant, Liam Jenkins, not guilty on all charges." The words washed over Liam like a tidal wave. Relief, gratitude, and exhaustion overwhelmed him as he slumped in his seat. Clara squeezed his shoulder, her eyes shining with pride. Micah ran to Liam after the court adjourned, throwing his small arms around him. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have told the truth sooner." Liam hugged him tightly. "You were brave, Micah. You saved us both." But Liam knew the battle wasn't entirely over. The scars left by the accusations, the whispers, and the trial wouldn't heal overnight, and Micah's future remained uncertain. Yet, as they walked out of the courthouse together, the sun breaking through the clouds, Liam felt something he hadn't in weeks: hope. The days following the verdict were a whirlwind of change, but they brought no instant relief. Though Liam's innocence had been proven in court, the whispers and stares didn't vanish overnight. In the eyes of some, doubt lingered like an unwelcome shadow. For weeks, Liam avoided the places that had once been part of his routine: the library, the corner coffee shop, even the park where he used to read on quiet afternoons. Still, he wasn't entirely alone. Clara stayed close, her unwavering belief in him a lifeline during the hardest moments. Micah, too, remained a presence in Liam's life, though their relationship was careful, tentative. The boy was placed in a new foster home with Clara's help, a safer environment far from the gang's influence. But the weight of his past was visible in the way he flinched at sudden noises or avoided meeting strangers' eyes. One evening, Clara came to visit Liam at Alina's apartment. She brought takeout and a small stack of papers, which she set on the kitchen table. "What's all this?" Liam asked as he cleared space. "Applications," Clara said with a grin, "for volunteer programs with at-risk youth. I thought you might want to look them over." Liam's brow furrowed as he flipped through the forms. "I'm not sure I'm ready for something like this." "You are," Clara said firmly. "You've been where these kids are. Misunderstood, written off, left to fend for yourself. Who better to help them?" Liam stared at her, the truth of her words sinking in. "What if I'm not enough?" Clara reached across the table, her hand covering his. "You already are. The fact that you're asking that question proves it." With Clara's encouragement, Liam began volunteering at a community center that ran programs for underserved children. At first, he doubted himself, unsure how to connect with kids who had experienced so much pain. But slowly, he found his footing. He helped with homework, taught them how to navigate the library's resources, and listened when they opened up about their struggles. It wasn't always easy. Many of the children were wary of adults, their trust hard-earned and fragile. But Liam saw pieces of Micah in each of them, the quiet hope buried beneath layers of fear and uncertainty, and he worked tirelessly to nurture it. Micah, too, began to heal. With Clara's support, he attended therapy sessions and started school in a new district. Liam stayed in touch, often meeting him for weekend lunches or trips to the park. They didn't talk much about the trial or the night in the alley, but their bond grew in unspoken ways. Micah began to smile more, his laughter breaking through the walls he had built around himself. One afternoon, as they sat on a park bench eating ice cream, Micah turned to Liam with a question that caught him off guard. "Do you think the man in the alley is okay?" Liam hesitated, then nodded. "I heard he's recovering. The doctor said he'll be fine." Micah looked relieved but thoughtful. "I wish I could tell him I'm sorry." "You don't have to carry that guilt, Micah," Liam said gently. "What happened that night wasn't your fault. Micah nodded slowly, but Liam could see the weight of it still clinging to him. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You've already done something incredible by telling the truth. That's what matters." As Liam rebuilt his life, he found solace in the community that had once turned its back on him. Slowly, people began to recognize his dedication to the children at the center, the quiet strength with which he carried himself. Some even apologized for their earlier judgments, though Liam accepted these gestures with humility rather than bitterness. One evening, as he was closing up the library, his suspension lifted, his job reinstated, Alina appeared at the door. She held a cake box in one hand and a bottle of sparkling cider in the other. "What's this for?" Liam asked, smiling as he let her in. "For you," Alina said, setting the items on the counter. "To celebrate everything you've been through and everything you've done." Liam's smile faltered, emotion welling up in his chest. "I don't know if there's much to celebrate." Alina shook her head. "You're wrong. You didn't just clear your name, Liam. You fought for the truth, for Micah, for yourself. That's worth celebrating." They shared the simple meal, laughing and reminiscing as the weight of the past few months seemed to lift, if only for a little while. One of the final steps in Liam's journey came on a rainy afternoon, when he stood in the alley where it had all begun. The storm clouds overhead mirrored the ones that had hung over his life for so long. But this time, Liam felt a quiet sense of closure. Clara and Micah joined him, the boy clinging to her hand as they approached the spot where it had all unraveled. Micah crouched down, his small fingers brushing the ground. "It doesn't scare me as much anymore," Micah said softly. "That's because you're stronger now," Liam replied. "We both are." Micah stood, his eyes meeting Liam's with a newfound steadiness. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Liam crouched, his voice filled with emotion. "You taught me what it means to be brave, Micah." "I should be thanking you." As they left the alley, the rain began to fall, soft and cleansing. Liam tilted his face toward the sky, letting the droplets wash away the remnants of doubt and pain. The storm that had once seemed endless had finally passed. Months passed, and the city moved on, as cities always do. The scandal that had once painted Liam as a pariah faded into the background, replaced by newer headlines and fresher controversies. But for Liam, the journey had left an indelible mark. The man who stood at the edge of the community center's courtyard one crisp autumn morning was different. A little older, a little wearier, but also stronger, steadier. The courtyard was alive with laughter and shouts as children chased one another or sat in small groups working on crafts. Liam watched them with a quiet sense of pride. Among the kids was Micah, now more confident, his slight frame carrying a resilience that hadn't been there before. He was helping a younger boy tie his shoelaces, his small face lit with a rare smile. Clara joined Liam, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "It's good to see him like this," she said, handing him a cup. Liam nodded. "He's come so far. I still can't believe he's the same kid I met that night." Clara glanced at him, her expression warm. "You've come a long way, too. Don't forget that." Liam smiled, but his gaze remained on Micah. "I never thought this would be my life," he admitted. "Before all of this, I just wanted a quiet, simple existence. But now, I can't imagine doing anything else." Clara sipped her coffee, her eyes twinkling. "Funny how life works. Sometimes it throws storms at us to push us where we're meant to be." Later that day, as Liam packed up his things at the library, a man approached the counter. His face was gaunt but kind, his movements slow, deliberate. "You're Liam Jenkins, aren't you?" the man asked, his voice rasping as if it hadn't been used much lately. Liam straightened, recognizing him instantly. It was the man from the alley, the one whose assault had nearly destroyed Liam's life. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the weight of their shared history filling the space between them. "I wanted to thank you," the man said, breaking the silence, "for what you did, for helping that boy, and for forgiving me." Liam blinked, caught off guard. "You don't owe me an apology." The man shook his head. "I do. I let my fear and anger cloud my judgment that night. I was so desperate to find someone to blame, I didn't stop to think. I'm sorry for everything you went through because of me." Liam hesitated, then extended his hand. "It's in the past. I'm just glad you're okay." The man took his hand, his grip firm but gentle. You're a good man, Liam. Don't let anyone make you forget that. That evening, as Liam walked home, he passed the alley where it had all begun. The rain had cleaned the streets earlier in the day, leaving the air fresh and the pavement glistening under the streetlights. He paused, taking in the quiet, and pulled a small notebook from his pocket. Inside were names, children he had worked with, including Micah. It was a simple list, but to Liam, it represented something far greater. Lives touched, paths altered, hope restored. As he closed the notebook, a light drizzle began to fall. Liam tilted his face toward the sky, letting the droplets kiss his skin. This time, the rain felt different. It wasn't cold or punishing. It was soft, renewing, like a promise of something better. Micah's words echoed in his mind. "Thank you for not giving up on me." And as Liam walked away from the alley, his steps steady and sure, he felt a quiet certainty. The storms of life might come again, but he had learned how to weather them and how to help others do the same. If you were moved, subscribe to HeroKind Stories for more tales that stir the heart and inspire the soul. Share this story with friends who believe in second chances and the strength of the human spirit. Leave a comment below. What part of Liam's journey resonated most with you? Let's keep the conversation going.